Hi guys, Claudia Boleyn here, and today I wanted to talk about BPD again, and today's video is about if having BPD makes you a bad person. Obviously the answer to that straight away is no, it doesn't make you a bad person, but I wanted to talk about how when you have BPD, maybe because of a mixture of things like the stigma, the lack of education surrounding it, like the ignorance surrounding the disorder, and because of like the issues that people with BPD have, we can kind of feel like we're bad people inherently on the inside, and it's something that I struggle with and that I thought might be interesting to talk about, because my last video about BPD and obsessions, using like obsessions with stuff to cope with the emotional ups and downs that are really extreme, has had a really good response, and a lot of people related to that, so hopefully I'm not on my own here and other people relate to this as well. So if you look up borderline personality disorder online, which I have done a lot, especially after my diagnosis and, you know, wanting to find out more about it and how I could help myself deal with it, you'll find a lot of it is very negative online, and it's quite scary. I just want to say that so much of that stuff is really vile and dangerous, and it's misinformation and it's horrible. It's usually coming from people who've had experience with one borderline person who hasn't been engaging in therapy, who has had abusive behaviours, and they have decided that everybody with BPD therefore has to be like that because the person they knew also had BPD, and therefore every BPD person has that. And that's so ridiculous. Like, it doesn't make any sense, because BPD is a disorder, and it impacts like our mental health, and it's like any other disorder. I mean, the disorder is just the symptoms and the way you feel and how it affects you. The person, like we, the sufferers, are in charge of the way we act. We are responsible for the way we act. So they're completely different things. Your symptoms and the way you react to them and the way you treat other people are just entirely separate issues. I think a lot of us inherently feel like we're bad people, and I think this is actually one of the symptoms, kind of. It's like a feeling of emptiness and feeling like you're not worthy as a person and that you're bad. And a lot of us struggle with abandonment issues, and that might be where it comes from. I think most people with BPD struggle with abandonment and have had something like that, or perhaps a trauma in their younger life. And it's sort of maybe made them feel, oh, I must be a bad person somehow. Like, that's not true, but that can be what your brain tells you, especially if you're young and you're dealing with things. So you start to feel like you're a bad person, like you're worthless, like you almost deserve the stuff that's happened to you. People don't really understand mental illness in general, and so there's well-meaning people out there who seem to think that if you do enough yoga and you drink enough water and you're a good person, you can get on top of your mental health and be absolutely fine. And yeah, obviously if you exercise and you eat well and you go to therapy, like, you can really get a handle on your mental health, and that's a great thing. I'm not knocking that. But there seems to be this idea that if you just grin and bear it and just refuse to think negatively, you'll be completely fine. And that if you have mental illness, therefore it's kind of your own fault for not trying hard enough to sort of not have it. But it doesn't work like that, because it's an illness. So, you know, you can obviously help yourself with your symptoms, which I'll talk about in a bit, and you can, you know, make life easier for yourself and learn to deal with it, but it's not something that necessarily will go away. So that kind of makes you feel like a bad, guilty, selfish person sometimes, because you wonder why, oh, even when I'm doing all these things to try and make myself better, I'm still not better. I guess I must be doing something wrong. I've seen this described online actually excellently. I can't remember where I saw this, but it was like a couple of weeks ago, and someone was talking about this attitude, this ableist attitude that people have towards people with mental and physical disabilities, and it's sort of maybe some sort of like comfort to people who don't suffer from mental or physical disability, because it makes them feel safer. Like, if you're a good person and you do what you're supposed to and you work hard, then nothing can like hurt you or stop you. And it's because they don't really want to face the reality that you can be a really good person and work really hard, but there can be issues in life which will just affect you and make life difficult. That can be really hard to come to terms with, because it's something that can't be controlled. So I can understand why that's difficult to kind of understand, but it doesn't help when people use those attitudes and put them onto people with mental or physical disabilities. I mean, the reality of having a mental illness, I can't speak for having a physical disability, but for having a mental illness, is that it's just there. You don't have it because you deserve it, or you don't work hard enough or something, or you're selfish, or you can't, like, you're weak. You just have it. It's just something that you have, which is a part of you, which is a struggle. Like, every person in the world has some sort of struggle in their life, and for some people, that's mental illness. It's not something you get given or end up with because you don't work hard enough to get a grip. So some of the symptoms for BPD, there's different types of BPD actually, and I believe there's the traditional borderline and there's the quiet borderline, and you can look up videos on that. There are some by a YouTuber called Katie Morton, which are very interesting there. You can, I'll put them in the description box so you can watch them yourself. I personally fall more under the quiet borderline because growing up I sort of learned to keep the sort of bad feelings and things to myself, and I sort of act out the anger and upset that borderlines can get. I tend to act out on myself, hence the self-harm and, the overdoses and things like that. I tend to sort of aim it inwards. So I mean, just talking about that though, there's different ways that people with borderline personality disorder present. Like, I'd say every person with BPD is different. Like, we have the same symptoms, but we kind of deal with them differently, and how we react to those symptoms depends on each person. So you can't, like, judge the whole disorder based on a certain sort of person that you're perhaps used to. I really genuinely struggle with feeling like I'm a bad person, and it's hard to explain. But I just feel constantly like I'm a bad person, and whenever I try and do something good, I feel like a fraud, like I'm just sort of putting it on. And it's really hard because when you have BPD, you can struggle with identity, and something I've tried to do over the past few years, before I understood my mental health, I was a completely different person. I wasn't in control of it, I didn't understand it, I found it really, really difficult. But as I started to understand it more, I decided that I wanted to do my absolute best to, be a good person and be kind to people and put goodness in the world and try and spread positivity and not to be mean and that sort of thing. And I try and do that, and I make such a big effort. But I find myself wondering sometimes, like, because I feel like I'm a bad person on the inside, it feels like I'm just trying to, like, make up for the fact that I'm this bad person on the inside, and that me being, like, trying to be nice and trying to do good things is just like an act, and it's really weird. I know why that is. I know why I personally, I think, feel like a bad person and a fake and a phony all the time, which I'm not going to get into in this video, but I think we all have our reasons for that. But it does have to do with my life and past and things that have gone on with me, so I can understand myself, but it's not something I can talk about in the video, so I'm sorry if this part seems really vague. But yeah, usually that feeling of feeling like you're a bad person and like you're a fake or like a fraud, yeah, it comes from, you can usually pinpoint it in your life. Sorry, I can't be more specific there, but I don't really want to talk about that stuff online. People say that having borderline personality disorder makes people manipulative, which is interesting because certainly, like, if you're untreated and you don't understand your BPD, then the behaviours that some borderlines show can seem really manipulative and can be manipulative. But I think what a lot of people don't understand about BPD, and I'm not excusing those behaviours of the people who haven't, got help and do express it in that way, is that it's rooted in a lot of fear. So you have people who are terrified of abandonment and feel like scared all the time and like they've got no emotional skin, and it makes them act out and they're desperate not to be left and not to be abandoned, and they feel like they're worthless. So I feel like some more compassion is needed sometimes when we talk about BPD. So some of those manipulative behaviours that you can see in some borderlines are still not okay, and nobody should have to deal with that, and they're wrong, and that those people need to take control of themselves and need to take charge and say, look, I need to get myself help for the sake of the people around me and for the sake of myself and to look after myself. But I think that there could be more understanding. There seems to be this idea that, like, people with BPD are just, they're just nightmares and they're monsters, but there's no care taken to understand maybe where that might come from. I'm someone who thinks that mental illness doesn't excuse a person's actions, and it can't be used to excuse a person's actions. It can be used to explain actions, definitely. But at the same time, we've got to be accountable, I think, especially when we're adults. So, I mean, I'm 23 and it's really important to me that I am accountable for my own actions. So even when I am really, really low and I'm having a really bad time with my BPD, I try to make sure that I am accountable for what I do and my own feelings. I can't control what I feel. I can't control how bad that is and how traumatic that can be, but I can control how I treat other people and not letting that lead to any like unhealthy behaviours. For example, with splitting, something that people with BPD can do, you probably know if you're someone with BPD yourself watching this, but people with BPD are quite known for seeing the world in black and white before, if they're untreated, by the way. If they're, you know, once you get insight into it, you can control it because you understand it, and therefore you can detach and say, okay, I'm feeling this. That makes no sense. I'm just going to ignore it, like with loads of mental illnesses. But yeah, at first it's really hard because you can see things in black and white. And again, there are reasons for this in childhood, maybe being not being able to trust in attachment figures. So one minute you feel like you're wanted, the next minute you feel like you're hated, and it sets up this weird sort of feeling of everything is good or everything is bad, or a person is evil or a person is wonderful, or you love them or you hate them. And that can be really hard. And that is something I struggle with in terms of emotions now. I think maybe when I was younger, I think I would have thought, like, one minute, oh, I hate this person, the next minute, oh, they're wonderful, they're the best in the world. And it's like, you know, it's really messed up and hard to deal with. But now I'm older, I can take responsibility for that. So when I feel myself going into that sort of dichotomy and putting people into like black and white boxes, I'm able to step back from that thought and acknowledge it and just say, look, I know why my brain's doing this. I know why, because of my childhood and my past. I know why my brain does this, and it's a protection strategy. I know why it does it, but I need to detach from it and I need to just acknowledge it and say that I understand it. Thank you for trying to help, brain. But life is more complicated than that, and people are more complicated than that. So we're not going to act on it, and we're just going to try and take ourselves away from the situation. Like, it's hard when you split on a loved one, and my loved ones, they don't usually know when I do this, and I'm really glad. And it might be because I'm a quiet borderline and I've learned to sort of keep things very inward, but I do find myself like 1 minute loving a person, 1 minute hating a person. And it's my duty, I feel, as someone who has BPD and understands it and understands why it happens, like that, I don't need to let that impact those people in my life that I love, you know. And it's up to me to make sure that sometimes I just take myself away. Sometimes I like go upstairs or listen to music or something, and I just say to myself, look, you're splitting. It's not good. Like, just chill and it will pass. And that's kind of how I deal with it. And I think that might be an example of how the symptoms of BPD don't make you be a bad person. You know, it's how you deal with those symptoms and how you choose to act as an adult. There are definitely times when I get extra emotional, and sometimes, you know, I'll snap and, you know, have rows with people. Not actually very often for me. I'm not a very confrontational person. As I say, like, I sort of keep things very inward and I take things out on myself and I get very upset. But there are times when I'm extra emotional and struggling, and I'll argue with a loved one. And I always make sure that if I have said something that is cruel or I've, you know, gone too far, I will always make sure that I apologise to that person and I say to them, I'm sorry for what I said, and that was my fault. I was in the wrong. I should not have said that. It was just out of line, and I'm genuinely really sorry, and I love you a lot. And it goes a long way to be able to do that. Apologising is something I used to find hard. Again, it's to do with my history, that there's stuff in my history which makes that difficult. Because around me I never really saw apologies for things. So it was a new thing for me to understand that I actually could apologise and be in the wrong and it wasn't the end of the world. And now I find that really healing, to be able to, even if I'm not, you know, being horrible to people, which I hope I'm not often, I don't think I am. I try my best not to be. But it's good to be able to look at yourself and say, look, you're feeling emotions really intensely and you feel these way about certain people, and it's okay. It's fine to feel that way. It's not bad to feel that emotion. The bad thing would be, you know, if you took it out on that person, which you don't have to do and you're not going to do. That is a state of awareness which is really healthy and you can 100% get to. Something I really hate is that for some reason people can use BPD or personality disorders as a byword for being abusive, and that makes me so angry, because the reason, we don't know why BPD forms in a person, but so many people who suffer with borderline personality disorder especially have been victims of trauma or abuse themselves. So to act like to just simply have the disorder makes you an abusive person is utterly disgusting, and it's not true. It's not true at all. There's no basis in fact for that. Like, categorically, no. Having BPD does not make you an abusive person. Like, it's what you do with the feelings you have, and that's on you as an adult. And the thing with BPD is that the person that it hurts the most, just the symptoms of BPD, is the sufferer. And there's so much emphasis on, oh, people with BPD are nasty, oh, they're terrible girlfriends or something, because usually BPD is associated with women, which is kind of sexist actually. But there's so much association with BPD being like abusive and people who are bad, and it's just, that's really disgusting and bad, because these are people who like are suffering. Like, having BPD is really, really hard, and it doesn't make you a bad person at all. Like, imagine villainizing a group of people who are struggling that much, like who have such a high rate of suicide because they genuinely struggle with life so much. I also want to say, like, if you're someone who is just sort of coming to terms with it maybe, and maybe in the past you've acted out when you didn't understand it and you feel like you're just a bad person because of that, you can always change, and you can always help yourself and help others around you. Because I mean, I've not always been the person that I try to be now. I really struggled, and you know, with my mental illnesses and stuff that's gone on in my life, you know, it hasn't always made me the nicest person. It hasn't always made me the most considerate person. I mean, sometimes I just had to look out for number one and try and protect myself and protect the people that I really cared about, and it's a real struggle. But you have to be kind to yourself and acknowledge that you've struggled and that you are struggling and that you're trying to be a good person, and you can turn it around. And even if you feel like you're doing good in a sort of performative way, like even if you feel like, you know, oh, I'm just doing this because I feel like a bad person, then it's still being good, isn't it? It's still putting goodness out there. It's still taking those steps to be kind and to try and make the world a better place. So please don't feel like, oh, I've got BPD and I didn't used to know how to handle it, and that makes me a bad person forever. It doesn't make you a bad person forever. It just means that you need to take responsibility for your actions, and have compassion for yourself when it comes to the way you feel, because you can't help the way you feel at all, but you can help yourself in terms of learning to deal with those feelings and what you choose to do with them, which is what I am doing, and I hope I'm being successful with that. But I am trying to be a good person and to, you know, to deal with it, and it's hard. But yeah, I don't think having BPD makes you a bad person. In fact, I know it doesn't make you a bad person. I genuinely 100% know that, so do not feel that way. I'm sorry there's so much stigma and so many people being nasty about it, but I think that will stop in like the future. I think it's just one of those things which isn't really understood, like lots of mental illnesses. I think like we've come leaps and bounds in, you know, learning about depression and anxiety and things like that, and you can really see the change. Like, people are so kind about those things, and people are starting to understand and be really compassionate, and it's nice. That will come for some of the other illnesses too, I think. It just might take a little while, but it will get there. It's just that we're sort of on the brink of understanding. Just try to be kind, and also forgive yourself if you make mistakes or you slip up, because I know that having BPD can be absolutely hellish and really, really hard to deal with. So don't beat yourself up forever for it. Honestly, it doesn't make you a bad person. So I love you loads, and I hope this helped in some way. And yeah, I hope this was helpful. I don't know, maybe it was, I'm not sure. I love you loads, and I will see you really soon. Bye.